The Zephyrian ambassador's mandibles clicked nervously as she approached the massive crystalline structure that housed the Galactic Council chambers. Her species had ruled 3 star systems for over 2 millennia, but today she felt as small as a hatchling facing her first predator. The emergency session had been called within hours of the incident, and representatives from 47 different species were already gathering in the Great Hall. Ambassador Kethara had always prided herself on her knowledge of galactic politics. She understood the delicate balance that kept peace between the various empires, the trade agreements that bound civilizations together, and the unspoken rules that prevented total war. But there was one law that even she, with all her experience, had never fully grasped the importance of until now. The massive doors of the council chamber slid open with a sound like distant thunder. Inside, the circular amphitheater buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. Representatives sat according to their species' traditional preferences. The aquatic Mercalli in their water-filled chambers, the gas-breathing Vorton floating in their atmospheric bubbles, and the silicon-based crystallines reflecting light from their geometric forms. At the center of the chamber stood the Arbiter, an ancient being whose species had long ago transcended physical form. Its voice resonated directly in the minds of all present, carrying the weight of countless eons of wisdom. We gather today to address a violation that threatens the very foundation of our galactic community, the Arbiter announced. The hegemony of Drakmor has broken the first law. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The first law was simple, written in every galactic treaty for the past 800 years. No empire shall initiate hostile action against the human, territories or human vessels, without just cause recognized by the Galactic Council. Kethara remembered when she first learned of this law as a young diplomat. It had seemed absurd. Humans were a relatively new species to the galactic stage. Having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago, they controlled merely 12 star systems compared to the hundreds held by the major empires. Their technology, while advancing rapidly, was still considered primitive by most standards. Their ships were bulky and inefficient, their weapons crude but effective, and their diplomatic approach often baffled more sophisticated civilizations. So why did this law exist? Why did every major power in the galaxy agree to give special protection to such a minor species? The answer had become galactic legend, though many younger beings dismissed it as myth. 800 years ago, humans had been even smaller players on the galactic stage. They had recently made contact with the Altarian Trade Federation and were eager to establish peaceful relationships with other species. A group of human explorers, scientists and diplomats had been traveling aboard a small research vessel called the Harmony when they encountered a Vrakan warfleet. The Vrakan were an aggressive species known for their brutality and their belief that might made right. They had been expanding their territory through conquest and intimidation, and they saw the lone human ship as easy prey. Without warning or provocation, they attacked and destroyed the Harmony, killing all 200 humans aboard, including several families with children who had been part of a cultural exchange program. The Vrakan expected no retaliation. After all, what could one minor species do against their mighty empire? They learned the answer within 6 months. The Human Confederation had declared what they called a total war against the Vrakan Empire. It was a concept that even the most warlike species found difficult to comprehend. Not just military targets, but every Vrakan installation, every supply line, every ally who provided support. The humans fought with a ferocity and determination that shocked the galaxy. But it wasn't just their aggression that made other species take notice. It was their adaptability. Human tactics evolved with each battle. They studied their enemies' weaknesses, learned from every defeat, and turned the Vrakan's own strengths against them. When the Vrakan used superior shields, humans developed phase weapons. When the Vrakan employed faster ships, humans created gravity traps. When the Vrakan tried to hide in asteroid fields, humans learned to fight in zero visibility conditions. Most terrifying of all was their refusal to accept defeat. Other species might surrender when facing overwhelming odds, negotiate when their fleets were destroyed, or retreat when their colonies were threatened. Humans did none of these things. They fought from their ships until those ships were destroyed, then fought from escape pods. They fought from their colonies until those colonies fell, then fought as guerrillas from the wilderness. They fought until they died, and their children fought after them. The war lasted 3 years. When it ended, the Vrakan Empire no longer existed. Every world, every ship, every trace of their civilization had been systematically dismantled. The humans had not just won, they had erased their enemy from existence so completely that archaeologists still struggled to piece together what Vrakan culture had actually been. Like Kethara shuddered as she remembered the historical recordings she had studied. The aftermath of that war had terrified the galaxy more than the war itself, because when it was over, the humans had simply stopped fighting. They had returned to their peaceful exploration and trade as if nothing had happened. They rebuilt their losses, honored their dead, and extended hands of friendship to other species as if they had not just demonstrated their capacity for absolute destruction. That was when the first law had been proposed and unanimously approved by every major power in the galaxy, not out of respect for human strength, but out of fear of human determination. Because every species now understood a fundamental truth about humanity. They might be slow to anger, but once that anger was provoked, they would not stop until their enemy was nothing but cosmic dust. Now, as Ambassador Kethara looked around the council chamber at the worried faces of her fellow representatives, she realized that the hegemony of Drakmor was about to learn this lesson firsthand, and the galaxy was about to remember why the first law existed. Admiral Vorak of the hegemony battlecruiser Dominator stood on his command bridge, his scaled hide gleaming under the harsh lights. The Drakmor were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 3 meters tall with thick armored skin and powerful claws. They had built their empire through conquest and maintained it through fear. In Vorak's mind, strength was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy. The human merchant vessel Prairie Wind hung in space before them, its hull scarred from years of interstellar trade. The ship was barely 1/10 the size of Vorak's warship, with outdated shields and weapons that wouldn't scratch the paint on a Drakmor fighter. To Vorak, it represented everything weak about the current galactic order. Soft species engaging in soft commerce, protected by soft laws that prevented strong warriors from taking what they deserved. "Sir, the human vessel is requesting safe passage through this system," reported his communications officer. "They claim to be carrying medical supplies to the Kepler colony." Vorak's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "Medical supplies? Let them find another route. This system belongs to the hegemony now, and we do not grant passage to weaklings." His tactical officer looked up from his console. "Admiral, perhaps we should consider the implications. The first law clearly states that unprovoked actions against human vessels—" "Silence!" Vorak's claws scraped against the metal railing as he gripped it. "I did not rise to command by cowering before ancient treaties written by cowards. The humans are few and weak. Their so-called total war against the Vrakan was centuries ago, against an enemy even weaker than themselves. Times have changed." The truth was that Vorak had been planning this moment for months. The hegemony had been expanding aggressively, and their actions had drawn criticism from the Galactic Council. Several minor species had filed complaints, and economic sanctions were being discussed. Vorak believed that a show of force against the humans would prove that the hegemony feared no one, not even those protected by the galaxy's most sacred law. He had chosen his target carefully. The Prairie Wind carried a crew of only 30 humans, with no military escort and minimal weapons. Its captain, Maria Santos, was known throughout the sector as a peaceful trader who had spent 15 years building relationships with various alien species. She had even learned to speak basic Drakmor out of respect for their culture. "Open a channel to the human ship," Vorak commanded. Captain Santos appeared on the main screen, her weathered face showing concern but not fear. Behind her, Vorak could see the cramped bridge of the merchant vessel, with its jury-rigged equipment and patched hull plates. Everything about the ship screamed vulnerability. "This is Captain Santos of the Prairie Wind," she said in accented but understandable Drakmor. "We request safe passage through your system. We carry medical supplies urgently needed at Kepler Colony. There's been an outbreak of Rigel fever, and children are dying." Vorak stepped forward, enjoying the way his massive form filled the screen. "I am Admiral Vorak of the Hegemony. This system is under our protection now. You will surrender your cargo and submit to boarding, or you will be destroyed. Santos's expression hardened. Admiral, I'm sure you're aware of the galactic treaties regarding— I am aware of nothing but strength and weakness, Vorak interrupted. You have 30 seconds to comply, or I will demonstrate the difference. The human captain looked around her bridge, meeting the eyes of her crew. Vorak could see the fear in their faces, and it satisfied him. These were not warriors but simple merchants and engineers, people who had chosen trade over conquest, diplomacy over domination. Admiral, Santos said quietly, I'm begging you to reconsider. The medicine we carry will save hundreds of lives. Surely there's a way we can resolve this without violence. Vorak's smile revealed rows of sharp teeth. Your time is up, human. He nodded to his weapons officer, who fired a single plasma bolt that struck the Prairie Wind's engine section. The merchant ship shuddered and began to drift, its power systems failing. Emergency lights flickered on the human bridge as alarms began to sound. Now you will prepare for boarding, Vorak announced. Your cargo will be confiscated, and your crew will be enslaved according to hegemony law. But Captain Santos did something unexpected. Instead of pleading or surrendering, she activated her ship's emergency beacon. Not the standard distress call, but a specific signal that every human vessel was equipped to send. The signal that meant only one thing: unprovoked attack by hostile aliens. Captain, her communications officer reported, the beacon is transmitting on all human emergency frequencies. Santos nodded grimly. Make sure it includes everything: ship logs, sensor readings, communication records. Let them know exactly what happened here. Vorak watched this exchange with amusement. Calling for help, human? Your nearest colony is 3 days away. My boarding parties will be on your ship in minutes. I'm not calling for help, Admiral, Santos replied quietly. I'm sending a message. As Drakmor soldiers prepared to board the crippled human vessel, the emergency beacon continued its broadcast, sending detailed information about the attack across subspace. The signal would reach human listening posts within hours, then spread throughout the human communication network. Every human ship, every human colony, every human military installation would know that the hegemony had fired first on an unarmed merchant vessel carrying medical supplies to dying children. Vorak had broken the first law, but more than that, he had done something that the Fraken had done 8 centuries ago. He had shown humans that their peaceful intentions meant nothing to a stronger enemy. He had taught them that in a galaxy of predators, being reasonable was seen as weakness. He had reminded humanity why they had once turned an entire species into cosmic dust. The boarding pods launched from the Dominator, carrying Drakmor warriors to claim their prize. Behind them, the emergency beacon continued its transmission, counting down the hours until the galaxy would remember why the first law existed. Admiral Chen Wei was reviewing supply reports in her quarters aboard the Human Confederation Dreadnought Yorktown when the emergency beacon reached the Terran Defense Network. The soft chime of her personal communicator interrupted her work, followed by the voice of her aide. Admiral, priority alpha message from Fleet Command. Classification absolute. Chen set down her tablet, already knowing what she would hear. In 30 years of service, she had never received an absolute classification. There was only one event that warranted such a designation. Patch it through, Lieutenant. Fleet Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared on her screen, his expression grim. Behind him, Chen could see the bustling activity of the Strategic Command Center on Earth, where officers moved with the urgent precision of a military machine shifting into its highest gear. Chen, I'm sending you the full data packet from the Prairie Wind incident. Review it and confirm receipt. The files downloaded to her personal tablet in seconds. Captain Santos's last transmission, sensor logs showing the Drakmor attack, engineering reports on the ship's damage, and most damning of all, the recorded conversation between Santos and Admiral Vorak. Chen read through everything twice, her expression growing darker with each detail. Confirmed, sir. Unprovoked attack on an unarmed merchant vessel carrying medical supplies. 30 crew members, including 2 families with children. The Drakmor boarded the ship 6 hours ago. Harrison continued. We lost contact with the Prairie Wind immediately after. Latest intelligence suggests the crew has been taken as slaves to Drakmor space. Chen had served in 3 major conflicts and had seen the horrors that war could bring. But this was different. This wasn't a border dispute or a territorial conflict. This was exactly what the first law had been designed to prevent: a stronger species preying on humans simply because they believed they could. "What are my orders, sir?" Harrison's pause was barely perceptible, but Chen caught it. She realized he was about to give her orders that hadn't been issued in 800 years. As of this moment, the Human Confederation declares a state of total war against the hegemony of Drakmor. You are hereby appointed Supreme Commander of all military operations against Drakmor forces. Your objective is simple: complete elimination of the hegemony's capacity to threaten human lives. The words hung in the air between them. Totalvar, not a limited engagement, not a punitive expedition, but the complete mobilization of human military might against a single target. Chen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. "Sir, the hegemony controls over 60 star systems. They have a standing fleet of 12,000 warships and a population in the hundreds of billions. They're one of the major powers in the galaxy. I'm aware of the odds, Admiral. I'm also aware of what happened to the last species that made the mistake of harming innocent humans. Your fleet will be the first wave. Every available ship in the Confederation is being recalled for immediate deployment. We're also activating the reserve fleets and beginning full military production." Chen's mind raced through the implications. The Human Confederation had maintained a relatively small military for decades, focusing instead on exploration and trade. But she knew that hidden behind that peaceful facade was a war machine that had been carefully preserved and modernized since the Vrakan conflict. Shipyards that normally produced cargo vessels and research ships could be converted to warship production within weeks. Civilian pilots and engineers could be called up as naval reserves. Most importantly, the industrial capacity that had built a dozen human colonies could be turned toward building instruments of destruction. What about the Galactic Council? Have they been notified? They called for an emergency session the moment they detected the attack. Every major species is demanding an explanation from the Drakmor. But you know as well as I do that the Council won't act decisively. They'll debate and negotiate while human slaves suffer in Drakmor labor camps. Chen nodded grimly. The Galactic Council was designed to prevent wars, not fight them. When faced with a crisis, they would spend months discussing diplomatic solutions while the aggressor consolidated their gains. "Admiral, there's something else you need to know," Harrison continued. "This wasn't a random encounter. Our intelligence indicates that Vorak planned this attack specifically to test our resolve. The hegemony believes that 8 centuries have made us soft, that the stories of our war with the Vrakan are exaggerated legends." The full scope of the insult became clear to Chen. The Drakmor hadn't attacked the prairie wind out of greed or desperation. They had done it to prove a point, to show the galaxy that humans could be bullied and humiliated without consequence. They had chosen to make an example of Captain Santos and her crew. "How long until my fleet is ready for departure?" "The Yorktown and her battle group can depart within 12 hours. The second wave will follow within a week and the third wave within a month." "Chen, I want you to understand something. This isn't going to be like our previous conflicts. We're not fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting to ensure that every species in the galaxy remembers why the first law exists." Chen stood and moved to the viewport of her quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Captain Santos and her crew were prisoners of an empire that had made the fatal mistake of confusing human restraint with human weakness. "I understand, sir. The Drakmor wanted to see what happens when someone breaks the first law. They're about to get a very thorough demonstration." "Good hunting, Admiral. And remember, this doesn't end until every human is home and every Drakmor understands that attacking our people has consequences that last for generations." The communication ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. She activated her ship's internal communication system, knowing that within minutes every human vessel in the sector would receive the same message. "Attention all ships. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. As of this hour, the Human Confederation is at war with the hegemony of Drakmor. All civilian vessels are to return to human space immediately. All military vessels are to report for immediate deployment. We have citizens to rescue and enemies to remind why the galaxy fears an angry human." The Drakmor border fortress of Keth Prime had stood for 2 centuries, its massive weapons platforms and shield generators making it virtually impregnable, carved into an asteroid rich with rare metals. The station served as both a defensive position and a symbol of hegemony power. Its commander, General Thax, had boasted that no enemy fleet could penetrate its defenses. He was about to learn the difference between impossible and merely difficult. Admiral Chen's task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keth system, their ships arranged in a formation that had never been seen before in galactic warfare. The humans had spent 8 centuries studying every major battle in recorded history, learning from each victory and defeat. What they had created was something entirely new, a tactical doctrine that combined overwhelming firepower with adaptive strategy. The Human Confederation fleet consisted of 50 vessels, led by the dreadnought Yorktown. Each ship was smaller than its Drakmor equivalent, but packed with weapons and defensive systems that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. More importantly, every ship was crewed by humans who had been raised on stories of the Vrakan War, people who understood that retreat was not an option. "General, we have contacts on the perimeter," reported the Drakmor sensor officer. 50 ships, human configuration. They're moving toward the fortress. General Thax rose from his command throne, his massive form casting shadows across the control center. Like all Drakmor military leaders, he had earned his position through strength and cunning. He commanded over 300 defensive platforms and had a garrison of 50,000 warriors. The approaching human fleet was outnumbered 6-1. 50 ships? Thax laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Admiral Vorak was right. The humans are even weaker than we thought. "Open a channel." Admiral Chen appeared on the main screen, her uniform crisp and her expression cold. Behind her, the bridge of the Yorktown hummed with quiet efficiency. The Kex noticed that, unlike most species, the humans showed no fear or hesitation in the face of overwhelming odds. "I am General Thax, commander of Keth Prime. You will withdraw from the system immediately, or you will share the fate of your merchant friends." Chen's response was delivered in perfect Drakmor, her pronunciation flawless despite the difficulty of the language. "I am Admiral Chen of the Human Confederation. You will surrender this facility and all human prisoners in your custody. You have 5 minutes to comply." Thax's laughter echoed through the command center. 5 minutes? "Human, you face the strongest fortress in the hegemony. My shields can withstand a supernova. My weapons can destroy a moon. What can your tiny fleet possibly do to me?" "You're about to find out," Chen replied and cut the transmission. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human fleet split into multiple groups, each following a precisely calculated trajectory that seemed to make no tactical sense. Instead of concentrating their firepower on the fortress's weak points, they spread out across the system, making themselves harder to target while reducing their offensive capability. Thax ordered his platforms to open fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts and missile salvos that should have destroyed half the human fleet. But the human ships moved like nothing the Drakmor had ever seen. They accelerated and decelerated in patterns that seemed to violate the laws of physics, using gravitational assists and momentum transfers that turned space itself into a weapon. "Sir, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered," reported the tactical officer. "They're using the asteroid field as cover, but also as a kinetic weapon. They're hurting the debris toward our platforms." Thax watched in growing alarm as the human ships executed maneuvers that seemed impossible. They flew through asteroid fields at speeds that should have been suicidal, using microjumps to appear and disappear faster than the Drakmor targeting systems could track. Most disturbing of all, they adapted their tactics in real time, learning from each exchange and modifying their approach accordingly. The first Drakmor platform fell within minutes, destroyed not by direct weapons fire but by a carefully guided asteroid that the humans had accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. The second platform fell to a coordinated strike by 6 human destroyers that appeared from behind a gas giant, fired their entire missile payload, and vanished back into hyperspace before the Drakmor could respond. "They're using hit-and-run tactics," Thax growled. "Cowards! Stand and fight!" But the humans had no intention of fighting fair. They had studied the Drakmor military doctrine and identified its fundamental weakness. The hegemony relied on brute force and direct confrontation. Their warriors were brave but inflexible, their tactics unchanged for generations. Against an enemy that fought conventionally, the Drakmor were nearly unbeatable. Against an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules, they were helpless. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, every Drakmor platform had been destroyed or captured, and General Thax found himself facing Admiral Chen across the surrender table in what had once been his private quarters. The fortress that had stood for 2 centuries was now a burning wreck, its defenders either dead or imprisoned. How? Thax asked, his voice barely a whisper. We outnumbered you 6-1. Our shields were stronger, our weapons more powerful. Chen looked at him with something that might have been pity. You fought like warriors, General. We fought like humans. There's a difference. She stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the wreckage of the once mighty fortress. Your Admiral Vorak wanted to test our resolve. Consider this our reply. Every human prisoner will be returned unharmed, or this will be the fate of every Drakmor installation in the galaxy. Thax stared at her in disbelief. You cannot be serious. The hegemony controls 60 star systems. We have fleets that could darken the sky of your homeworld. Chen turned back to him, and for the first time Thax saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was the look of someone who had already decided that her enemy must be completely destroyed, and was merely working out the details. General, let me explain something about humans. We didn't come to fight your fleet. We came to eliminate your species' ability to threaten our people. What you call 60 star systems, we call 60 targets. What you call mighty fleets, we call practice. As Chen left the ruined command center, Thax finally understood the magnitude of his species' mistake. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had demonstrated that the Drakmor military advantage was an illusion. Every tactic, every strategy, every defensive position that the hegemony relied on had been systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to play by the established rules. The first law existed for a reason, and the Drakmor were about to learn that reason in the most painful way possible. Supreme Commander Zarkoth of the hegemony stood before the holographic display in his war room, watching the tactical situation deteriorate with each passing hour. In the 3 weeks since the destruction of Keth Prime, the humans had struck 17 more Drakmor installations with the same devastating efficiency. Each attack followed the same pattern, swift, overwhelming, and completely outside conventional military doctrine. The hegemony's greatest military minds had gathered on the capital world of Drakmora to devise a response. Generals who had conquered entire star systems found themselves baffled by an enemy that seemed to rewrite the rules of warfare with each engagement. The humans never attacked the same way twice, never used the same formations, and never gave the Drakmor a chance to adapt to their tactics. Report, Zarkoth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. General Kravik, survivor of the Battle of Zarian Station, stepped forward. His left arm was gone, replaced by a crude mechanical substitute, and his scaled hide bore the scars of human plasma weapons. The humans have taken the Zarion system completely. Our entire third fleet was destroyed or captured. They're not just defeating us, they're studying our ships, our weapons, our tactics. Every battle makes them stronger. Zarkoth's claws scraped against the metal table. The hegemony had ruled through superior technology and overwhelming force for 5 centuries. Their warships were larger, their shields stronger, their weapons more destructive than any other species in the galaxy. But somehow the humans were winning anyway. What of our allies? Have the Vorthon responded to our request for assistance? Admiral Thrain, commander of the hegemony navy, shifted uncomfortably. The Vorthon have declared neutrality. They cite the first law and claim they cannot intervene in a conflict that the hegemony initiated. The Crystalline Union has done the same. Even our trading partners are refusing to sell us weapons or supplies. The truth was worse than Zarkoth wanted to admit. The galaxy was not rallying to support the Drakmor against human aggression. Instead, every major species seemed to be watching with fascination as the humans systematically dismantled the hegemony's military power. Some were even openly celebrating, remembering their own grievances against Drakmor expansion. What about our defensive positions? Surely the humans cannot breach the outer ring fortifications. General Kravik's expression darkened. Sir, the humans don't attack our fortifications. They bypass them entirely. They strike at our supply lines, our communication networks, our industrial centers. They've turned our own defensive strategy against us by making our fortresses irrelevant. Zarkoth studied the tactical display, trying to comprehend how 50 human ships had managed to paralyze an empire. The answer was becoming terrifyingly clear. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They were fighting a war of systematic destruction, targeting not just military assets but the entire infrastructure that supported Drakmor civilization. Show me the latest. Engagement, Zarkoth ordered. Hologram shifted to display the Battle of Korak 7, where a Drakmor supply convoy had been intercepted by human forces. Zarkoth watched in growing horror as the human ships demonstrated tactics that seemed impossible. They moved through debris fields like predators through tall grass, using the wreckage of destroyed ships as cover and camouflage. They coordinated their attacks with mathematical precision, striking multiple targets simultaneously across light years of space. Most disturbing of all was their refusal to show mercy. When Drakmor ships attempted to surrender, the humans ignored their surrender signals and continued attacking until every enemy vessel was destroyed or completely disabled. They took prisoners only when those prisoners had information they needed, and they treated captured Drakmor with cold, professional efficiency rather than the hatred that might have been expected. They're not angry, Zarkoth realized suddenly. They're not fighting us out of rage or revenge. They're fighting us because they've decided we need to be eliminated. The observation sent a chill through the assembled officers. Anger could be reasoned with, negotiated with, eventually exhausted. But the humans were displaying something far more terrifying: clinical determination. They had identified the hegemony as a threat that needed to be removed, and they were going about that task with the same methodical approach they used for any engineering problem. "Sir," Admiral Thrain said quietly, "we're receiving communication from the human fleet. They want to speak with you directly." Zarkoth nodded grimly. He had been expecting this moment. The humans would demand surrender, offering terms that preserved Drakmor lives in exchange for submission. It was the standard approach used by civilized species when victory was assured. Admiral Chen appeared on the main screen, her expression as cold and professional as ever. Behind her, Zarkoth could see the bridge of a human dreadnought, bustling with activity as officers coordinated what was obviously a massive military operation. "Supreme Commander Zarkoth," Chen said in perfect Drakmor, "I am Admiral Chen of the Human Confederation. I have a message for you." "I assume you wish to discuss terms of surrender," Zarkoth replied, trying to maintain his dignity despite the desperate situation. Chen's expression didn't change. "You misunderstand, Commander. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to inform you of what's going to happen next." A new tactical display appeared on the screen, showing the current positions of human fleets throughout Drakmor space. Zarkoth felt his blood turn to ice as he realized the scale of the human operation. There weren't 50 ships anymore. There were thousands, spread across dozens of star systems in a coordinated campaign that dwarfed anything in military history. "As of this moment," Chen continued, "every Drakmor military installation, industrial center, and communication hub is under attack by human forces. Your fleet is being systematically destroyed. Your colonies are being occupied. Your government facilities are being captured." Zarkoth stared at the display in disbelief. "This is impossible. We have 12,000 warships, hundreds of fortifications, billions of citizens." "You had 12,000 warships," Chen corrected. "As of now, fewer than 3,000 remain operational, and that number is decreasing by the hour. Your fortifications are being bypassed or captured. Your citizens are being relocated to safe areas, while we dismantle your military infrastructure." The Supreme Commander felt his world collapsing around him. "What do you want?" "What are your demands?" Chen's answer was delivered with the same cold professionalism that had characterized every human communication since the war began. "We want you to understand something, Commander. 800 years ago, your predecessors learned what happens when someone attacks innocent humans. You chose to ignore that lesson. Now you're going to learn it firsthand." The transmission ended, leaving Zarkoth alone with his officers, and the terrible realization that the hegemony of Drakmor was being systematically erased from existence by an enemy that had turned warfare into a precise science. The rescue of the Prairie Wind survivors took place on the industrial world of Thrakis Prime, deep in the heart of what had once been Drakmor space. Captain Maria Santos and her crew had spent 6 weeks in Drakmor labor camps, forced to work in the toxic mining operations that fueled the hegemony's war machine. They had watched their captors' confidence slowly crumble as reports of human victories reached even the most isolated prison facilities. Santos stood in the camp's central courtyard, supporting her injured engineer Rodriguez. When the sky above them filled with human ships, the rescue fleet descended through the planet's atmosphere with the precision of a surgical instrument, their landing craft touching down exactly where they needed to be. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Commander Sarah Mitchell of the Human Marine Corps approached Santos with a relief that was visible even through her combat armor. Behind her, human soldiers were systematically freeing prisoners and providing medical care to those who needed it. The Drakmor guards had offered no resistance. Most had simply laid down their weapons when they realized what was happening. "Captain Santos," Mitchell said, removing her helmet to reveal a face marked by weeks of hard fighting. "I'm Commander Mitchell. We're here to take you home." Santos nodded, too exhausted for words. Around her, she could see other human prisoners, merchants, diplomats, tourists who had been in the wrong place when the war began. All of them bore the marks of Drakmor captivity, but all of them were alive. "Commander," Santos finally managed, "what happened to Admiral Vorak, the one who attacked my ship?" Mitchell's expression hardened. "He was captured 3 days ago when we took the Drakmor capital. He's being held for trial, along with the rest of the hegemony's leadership." As the rescued humans were loaded aboard the transport ships, Santos found herself looking out at the devastation that surrounded the former Drakmor Industrial Center. The massive factories that had produced weapons and warships for the hegemony lay in ruins, their machinery systematically dismantled by human engineering teams. But she noticed something that surprised her. The residential areas of the planet appeared untouched. Drakmor civilians moved freely through their neighborhoods, protected by human security forces. "Commander," Santos said, "I expected more destruction. When I heard about the war, I thought—" Mitchell understood what she was asking. "Captain, we're not here to commit genocide. We're here to ensure that the Drakmor never again have the ability to threaten human lives. Every military installation, every weapons factory, every ship capable of interstellar warfare, all of it is being destroyed or captured. But the Drakmor people themselves are being protected and relocated to safe worlds where they can rebuild their civilization." The distinction was important, and Santos realized it reflected something fundamental about human nature. Even in total war, even when facing an enemy that had shown no mercy, humans still distinguished between combatants and civilians, between those who made war and those who suffered from it. The journey back to human space took 5 days, and during that time Santos learned the full scope of what had happened since her capture. The hegemony of Drakmor had ceased to exist as a political entity. Their military had been completely destroyed, their leadership captured or killed, their weapons factories reduced to scrap metal. But most remarkably, the entire operation had been completed in less than 2 months. How? Santos asked Admiral Chen during a briefing aboard the flagship. "How did we defeat an empire in 8 weeks? Chen pulled up a tactical display showing the progression of the war. "We didn't defeat an empire, Captain. We dismantled a military machine. The Drakmor made the same mistake that many aggressive species make. They assumed that size and strength were the same thing. They built a massive military structure, but they never learned how to adapt when that structure was challenged." The display showed the systematic way human forces had targeted critical points in the Drakmor war machine: communication hubs that coordinated fleet movements, logistics centers that supplied distant outposts, training facilities that produced new officers, industrial complexes that manufactured weapons and ships. Each target had been chosen not for its symbolic value, but for its role in maintaining Drakmor military capability. "We also had advantages they didn't understand," Chen continued. "Our ships are smaller but more maneuverable. Our crews are trained to think independently rather than follow rigid doctrine. Most importantly, we've spent 8 centuries studying warfare while they spent 8 centuries relying on their reputation." Santos nodded, beginning to understand. The hegemony had been like a giant tree with shallow roots, impressive from a distance but vulnerable to anyone who understood where to strike. The humans had simply cut away the roots and watched the whole structure collapse. "What happens now?" Santos asked. "What happens to the Drakmor?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "They'll be resettled on worlds suitable for their species, with enough resources to rebuild their civilization. But they'll do it without weapons capable of threatening other species. We're also establishing monitoring stations to ensure they don't try to rebuild their military capability. And if they do try to rebuild, then they'll learn that the first lesson was the gentle one." As the rescue fleet approached Earth, Santos found herself thinking about the conversation she had overheard between 2 young human officers. They had been discussing the war with the casual professionalism of people who had just completed a difficult but necessary job. There was no celebration, no triumphalism, no sense that they had accomplished something glorious. They had simply done what needed to be done to protect their people. That, Santos realized, was perhaps the most terrifying thing about humans in war. They didn't fight out of hatred or bloodlust. They fought with the same methodical determination they brought to any challenge, whether it was exploring a new star system or designing a better engine. When someone threatened their people, they simply added, "Eliminate threat" to their list of tasks and worked through it with ruthless efficiency. The galaxy had rules about warfare, ancient traditions about honor and combat and the proper way to conduct conflicts between civilizations. Humans ignored all of those rules and focused on a single objective, making sure their people were safe. Everything else was just details to be worked out along the way. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, Santos understood why the first law existed and why every species in the galaxy had agreed to it. It wasn't about protecting humans from their enemies. It was about protecting everyone else from what humans became when their families were threatened. 2 years after the end of the Drakmor War, Ambassador Cathara found herself once again in the Galactic Council chambers. But the atmosphere was completely different from that emergency session that had started it all. The assembled representatives no longer buzzed with nervous energy. Instead, there was a profound quiet, the kind of silence that comes from witnessing something that fundamentally changes how the universe works. The Arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber as it addressed the gathered species. "We convene today to formally recognize the end of the Drakmor conflict and to address its implications for galactic law and order." Cathara looked around at her fellow ambassadors, noting how many of them avoided meeting her eyes. The Human Confederation had invited observers from every major species to witness the final phase of their war against the hegemony. What they had seen defied every assumption about warfare, conquest, and the nature of interstellar conflict. The humans had not simply defeated the Drakmor, they had surgically removed their ability to wage war while leaving their civilization intact. Former hegemony worlds were now peaceful colonies where Drakmor families rebuilt their lives under human protection. The species itself would survive and eventually thrive, but they would do so without the military might that had terrorized their neighbors for centuries. Ambassador Chen, Admiral Chen, had returned to diplomatic service after the war, stood to address the council. She wore a simple civilian suit rather than her military uniform, but somehow that made her presence even more imposing. Everyone in the chamber knew exactly what this quiet, professional woman was capable of accomplishing when her people were threatened. "Honored representatives," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "The Human Confederation wishes to thank the Council for its patience during our recent disagreement with the hegemony of Drakmor. We understand that our methods were unconventional, and we appreciate your understanding that sometimes unconventional threats require unconventional responses." The understatement drew nervous laughter from several ambassadors. Unconventional barely began to describe what the humans had done. They had redefined warfare, turning it from a contest of strength into a science of systematic dismantlement. Military academies across the galaxy were already rewriting their textbooks based on human tactics. "The Confederation would like to propose an amendment to galactic law," Chen continued. "Specifically an update to the first law that has served us all so well for the past 8 centuries. A murmur ran through the chamber. The first law was considered sacred, unchanged since its adoption after the Vrakan War. What could the humans possibly want to add to it? "We propose that the first law be expanded to include not just humans, but any species that commits itself to peaceful coexistence and mutual prosperity. Any empire that attacks innocent merchants, enslaves civilians, or threatens genocide should face the same consequences that the Drakmor faced." The proposal sent shockwaves through the assembly. What the humans were suggesting was revolutionary. A galaxy-wide guarantee of protection for peaceful species, backed by the demonstrated ability to enforce that protection. The Altarian representative was the first to speak. "Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that the Human Confederation is prepared to act as a galactic police force?" Chen's smile was slight but significant. "Not at all, Ambassador. We're suggesting that the galaxy should police itself, with the understanding that certain behaviors will no longer be tolerated by anyone. The Confederation is willing to provide assistance to any peaceful species that faces unprovoked aggression. but we hope that our recent demonstration has made such assistance unnecessary. Kethera understood the implications immediately. The humans weren't threatening anyone, they were offering protection. But implicit in that offer was a reminder of what happened to those who preyed on the innocent. The Drakmor War had proven that technological superiority and numerical advantage meant nothing against an enemy that was willing to completely redefine the rules of engagement. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Species after species rose to support the proposed amendment, each offering their own perspective on why the galaxy needed stronger protections for peaceful civilizations. Even former allies of the Drakmor spoke in favor of the new law, recognizing that the age of conquest through brute force was ending. When the vote was finally called, the result was unanimous. The second law was adopted by acclamation, establishing the principle that any species could appeal to the galactic community for protection against unprovoked aggression, and that such appeals would be answered with overwhelming force if necessary. As the session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Kethera approached Ambassador Chen. The human woman was studying a data pad, probably reviewing the details of the law she had just helped create. "Ambassador," Kethera said. "May I ask you something?" Chen looked up with genuine curiosity. "Of course. Do you really believe this will work? Can the galaxy actually police itself this way?" Chen considered the question carefully before answering. "Ambassador, for 800 years the galaxy has lived under the threat of predator species, empires that grew strong by conquering the weak. The Drakmor were just the latest example, but I think we've reached a turning point." She gestured toward the chamber where representatives were still discussing the implications of what they had just witnessed. "Every species here has seen what happens when someone breaks the fundamental rules of civilized behavior. They've seen that size and strength don't matter when you're facing an enemy that refuses to accept defeat. Most importantly, they've seen that peaceful species don't have to remain helpless in the face of aggression." Kethera nodded slowly. "And if someone tests the new law? If another species decides to follow the Drakmor's example?" Chen's expression became very serious. "Then they'll learn the same lesson the Drakmor learned. The galaxy has changed, Ambassador. The age of conquest is over. What comes next is an age of cooperation, protected by the knowledge that some lines can never be crossed without consequences." As Kethera watched the human ambassador leave the chamber, she reflected on how much had changed in just 2 years. The galaxy was still the same collection of diverse species competing for resources and territory. But now it operated under a new understanding, that peaceful civilizations would no longer stand alone against predators, and that the price of aggression had become too high for any rational species to pay. The first law had protected humans from their enemies. The second law would protect everyone from each other, and behind both laws stood the quiet promise that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that had turned warfare into a science, and was perfectly willing to demonstrate that science to anyone who needed the lesson. The Drakmor had wanted to test human resolve. Instead, they had created a new galactic order, where strength was measured not by the ability to conquer, but by the willingness to protect. It was a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations to come, a reminder that in a galaxy of empires, the most dangerous enemy was the one that fought not for conquest, but for the simple principle that innocent people should be allowed to live in peace.